Story 1. Wasn't to me, but I was in the room because I was accompanying my mom to all her appointments. Her surgeon basically told her, "You're right, there is a problem, but we can fix it," and it caused her to burst out in tears of happiness. She had been dealing with abdominal cramping and pain for going on 10 years, which started mild and had gotten progressively worse to the point where, when it would hit, she would be in tears, hunched over, unable to eat or move. A bunch of doctors had diagnosed and treated her for a bunch of things that did nothing for the pain, and eventually most had told her to get a psychological evaluation because it was clearly in her head. Finally, she convinced a surgeon to do some kind of exploratory surgery with a camera. It turns out it wasn't in her head. She had been born with a condition where her large intestine wasn't attached to her abdominal wall the way it was supposed to be. Over the previous 10 years, it had moved in such a way to coil around her small intestine, her appendix, and her colon, and it was starting to cut off circulation and cause cell death. They ended up removing something like 6 to 7 inches of her large intestine, her appendix, and a large part of her small intestine. Just like that, poof, all her abdominal pain was gone. Story 2. You, sir, have the veins of my dreams. Come look at this man's veins. Nurses then proceed to argue about who was going to take blood from said veins. Story 3. I told my doctor my knees crunch when I bend them. I showed him what I meant, and he said, "Wow, that doesn't sound very good," and then left the room. Appointment over. Story 4. My wonderful doctor was performing a biopsy in a very sensitive area and asked how my pain was during the procedure. I said I was okay because I have a high pain tolerance. She said that it still doesn't mean I have to be in pain. I had genuinely never thought like that before. Story 5. This is silly, but I went through some different stuff as a kid, and I had just seen a documentary about a few serial killers that made me scared of myself, as they had gone through similar things as me, and I was young and thought I might snap like them. She said that I was too empathetic to ever do such a thing, and that kind of reassured me that I wouldn't be a bad person growing up. Story 6. After pressing me about why I don't want children while seeking an intrauterine device, you said, "You should have at least one child to reduce your risk of breast cancer. Thanks, but I'll take my chances with the cancer." Story 7. Your uterus is very pretty. Oh, just like your mother. You have a cyst on your left ovary, even nearly the same size. He said while my mother was in the same room because back then I was too anxious to go to my own doctor appointments. By my gynecologist, who also is my mom's. Story 8. I used to suffer really badly from throat infections and was always at the doctor. An old retired doctor I met told me if I took antibiotics, it would be gone in a week. If not, it would clear up in 7 days. I've avoided unnecessary antibiotics for my throat ever since. Story 9. I always have to be careful how I talk to her because she doesn't know her husband is sterile. Makes you wonder where the 2 kids came from. Probably shouldn't have told you that. Now open wide, let's have a look at those tonsils. Story 10. Dentist, when speaking about stress headaches, you know your teeth are only supposed to touch when you chew and sometimes when you yawn, right? Nope. Thought they touched all the time. Story 11. I had my appendix taken out when I was 15. The doctor said it was an easy surgery due to the thin layer of fat. 30 years later, I would definitely not get the same compliment. Story 12. I had terrible, life-consuming acne as a teen. A dermatologist was a family friend and was retiring. He told me an antibacterial bar soap like Safeguard or Dial, and cold water and friction is better than any kind of drug, cream, or astringent that a doctor will suggest. I tried it, and my face cleared up completely within a month after a decade of socially crippling acne. I stopped my hour-long face cleaning rituals, which absolutely changed my life and helped me get my kids through puberty without their faces exploding like mine did. Edit. Added a hyphen for my cannabinoid consumption consultants. Story 13. He brought his office staff in to talk to me. I had just quit drinking, and she was a recovering alcoholic herself. She was so supportive and compassionate. I needed to hear things from someone just like me, and it really helped. Been sober since 2001. Story 14. When I was 14, I thought I might have an eating disorder because I was obsessing over my body and food. I went and saw the doctor, and he grabbed my belly, pinched it, and gave it a good shake and said, "I don't think you've got an eating disorder. You've still got some meat on your bones. You can guess what that did for my eating disorder. Story 15. Finally reached a breaking point at around 24 years old and went to an emergency psychiatric program thinking maybe having someone yell at me would get me to get it together, or maybe I'd be sent away and wouldn't have to deal with anything anymore. The combination of having someone explain that wanting to not exist my entire life wasn't normal, and the genuine shock from doctors that I hadn't ever turned to self-medicating with drugs was surprising. I'd always just kind of assumed I was being whiny and was a loser, and having someone sincerely validate that feeling so bad wasn't actually normal and was a medical problem was kind of life-changing. Had a lot of other revelations while getting treatment. Had testing done, and it turns out my brain doesn't produce serotonin at anything resembling a normal level. I wasn't a bad person, I was just sick. Story 16. I had a Navy dentist tell me I chewed tobacco. He spotted the thickened area just under my lower lip. He told me to keep it moving around because sitting in one spot increases the chance of cancer. Saw him chewing tobacco himself in port a few months later. Story 17. That I had to accept that the old me was dead, and I would never be that person again. It was really hard to hear. Took me ages to understand what she meant and more years to accept it. Story 18. Even though I tell him not to, my husband puts his Volvo key in his ear to get wax out. Said right after looking in my ear and presumably noticing scratches from my car key. How did she know it went to a Volvo? Story 19. I was only 7, but I had a horrible fever, stomach pain, and vomiting for 4 or 5 days. My mother and father finally took me to the hospital. I couldn't even get water past my lips without vomiting it up. Of course, I was dehydrated. The pain was relentless. I writhed in the bed, moaning and crying. They put me on intravenous therapy and x-rayed me for hours and days trying to find an obstruction or something. I stayed in the hospital for 4 weeks total and lost half of my body weight. They had even told my parents I might not make it if I couldn't start eating. One morning, I woke up, looked at my mom and said, "I'm hungry." You should have seen her face split into smiles of joy. Whatever I had was over, many years later thought to be an unknown variety of virus. They sent me home, and a week later, we had a follow-up with the doctor. He patted me on the head and told my mother, "Your daughter was obviously faking, and the next time she comes home complaining about a stomach ache, get a switch after her and send her back to school." My mother slapped him. I promise I am not making the story up. It was 1972. Things were different. I always thought he was so pompous he didn't want to admit he didn't know. Story 20. That I should consider termination if I couldn't handle normal morning sickness. I had hyperemesis gravidarum, was in the emergency room for the 3rd time that week for fluids, and it was a Catholic hospital. My next pregnancy was devoid of morning sickness and hyperemesis gravidarum, but I did lose my mom unexpectedly. My doctor cried with me when I told him. They had known each other their entire professional lives, but he didn't know she was my mom until it affected my care. Story 21. That the lump under my arm would go away by itself. Went to a different doctor who cut out a marble-sized malignant lump. Treated with radiation, and my case was put in the medical books according to my oncologist. I was 19. Story 22. I was 4 months postpartum and dealing with a bad adrenal fatigue issue, and the doctor told me, "Well, I can see you haven't lost the baby weight yet," and proceeded to blame my issues on that. Story 23. I was 6 weeks pregnant with my first child. At my first prenatal visit, the doctor checked the opening of my pelvis. His words were, "We could back an 18-wheeler in here." He seemed quite pleased. I guess he wasn't wrong, as I had a 10-pound baby vaginally with no problems. Story 24. I had a mole on my ear. Surgical removal was minor. The doctor said it was likely nothing. Then he called to say it was melanoma and it was deep and to come back in. The second surgery was a bigger deal. On a table with music playing, he marked the ear, and the nurse said, "That much?" But he was a good surgeon and you wouldn't notice. Then he called a couple of days later to say, "The big question is what to do next?" I said I thought it was over. "No," he said. "I told you it was deep. We could remove half your face, but it might not do any good." And so, For 2 months, waiting for an appointment with an oncologist, I thought I was going to live with half a face or it was too late for that. The oncologist was calm and said, "No worries. Wait and see." And he was right. 30 years later and I'm still fine. Story 25. I went to a new dentist because I needed a cleaning and had horrible pain in my tooth. They gave me the cleaning, prescribed some fancy toothpaste, and said there was nothing wrong with my tooth at all, but the toothpaste was just to make me feel better. A few months later, I went back to the doctor because, again, horrible tooth pain. By a stroke of luck, he was out of the office, and another dentist looked at me. She listened to me, took x-rays, and saw I needed a root canal. A few weeks later, I'm back for the root canal, and the first dentist is the one doing it. He asked, "How long have you been in pain?" I said, "Years," but no dentist would ever listen to me. He had the gall to say, "Well, I'm glad you're here now because we always listen." I wanted to slap him. I told him so many times, and he never listened. It literally took going to a different dentist for anyone in his office to listen to me. I got the root canal and then switched to a different dental office where I once in passing mentioned some pain, and they immediately listened to me. Story 26. I was having horrible abdominal pain and had my period every day for well over a year, passing huge clots and going through a tampon an hour. Anytime I went to a doctor, I was told to lose weight and it would get better. Finally, I must have annoyed my primary doctor enough that she ordered an ultrasound. I had a massive cyst that was bigger than my bladder and uterine fibroids. I was sent to a gynecologist who, after telling him my symptoms, said, "I am not giving you narcotics." After explaining how I had no quality of life because of this, he accused me of being a drug seeker. I ended up requiring open abdominal surgery because I had a massive cyst that had attached itself to everything and was twisting my ovary and fallopian tube. Story 27. My mom thought I was anemic when I was about 10. The doctor said I wasn't, and that Anna will always be pale and interesting. Thanks, Dr. Green. Story 28. This was a nurse, but I was at my 28-week prenatal appointment, and she straight up told me to watch my weight because I was gaining too much. I was 98 pounds, underweight, when I got pregnant and 125 pounds at that appointment. She suggested a 1,200-calorie diet. I always thought that was such a weird appointment. Story 29. I went in to get a sexually transmitted disease screening at my university's clinic. The doctor went through the whole checklist about partners and sexual acts. He had a snarky, judgmental remark after every answer I gave. I never went back to that clinic again. I went to Planned Parenthood instead, even though I had to pay there and it was free at the clinic. Story 30. After a freak and devastating chest infection, I was coming out of sedation, on a ventilator with a feeding tube and still unable to speak or even lift my arm much, from the surgeon inching out the drainage tubes in my chest bit by bit every day. "So you have all this time in bed. What language are you going to learn?" "Sir, I'm going to watch the entirety of Parks and Recreation and sleep a lot." It really just shows you how different people are wired. I'm glad the insane overachievers were part of my medical team, but I will never be one of them. My family still laughs about it. Story 31. I was a child under 12 on an experimental medication that caused me to gain weight. The studies had not yet shown that the drug caused weight gain, though. The pediatrician told me that if I didn't lose weight, they would take me from my family, so my mouth shut and put me on a liquid diet. They later apologized, gave me a notebook for a gift, and didn't work at that office anymore. Story 32. To me, an aerospace engineer, you clearly do not have the mental faculties required to understand the nuance of running a medical practice. When I questioned him why he was 3 hours late, after not calling or showing up the previous day, and after he was 2 hours late the month prior. Story 33. That cyst could be cancer. It should come out. The doctor was talking to another doctor on the phone about my young son outside the exam room with the door open. He had not told us yet, but we could hear him. Then he stood in the doorway and said, "I'm going to have a colleague come talk to you in a little bit," and walked away. Story 34. You have not been depressed long enough. Come back in 3 weeks. This was after months of crippling depression, when a friend dragged me to them and told them this. At the time, I did not plan on being here in 3 weeks. Story 35. We sometimes see the symptoms you are experiencing in patients with leukemia. They took a significant amount of blood tests. It was a Friday, the longest weekend of my life. I did not, fortunately, have leukemia. Story 36. Your blood can save many lives. Give blood all the time. And I do whenever I can. Luckily, my workplace provides benefits for donating blood, so it's a win-win. Story 37. I was dying from a ruptured ovarian cyst, and when I woke up after surgery, my surgeon showed me photos of the blood he drained out of my belly and said, "That's the most blood I've ever seen. I'm surprised you're not dead. Do you want me to email you these photos?" I did want them emailed, and I still have them. Story 38. A doctor after I had emergency surgery with complications due to stage 4 endometriosis that I had no clue about. You've got a high pain tolerance. That means if something is annoying, you need to go to the doctor. Your annoying is a normal person's 10.